Remember when free-to-play games weren't trying to become your second job? Back then, there was the side-scrolling action RPG that somehow managed to blend anime visuals, arcade-style combat, and MMO progression into something completely unique. For many players across Asia, Latin America, and even North America, Grand Chase wasn't just another online game. It was the online game. And despite shutting down over a decade ago before eventually returning as Grand Chase Classic, it's still one of the most sought after nostalgic MMORPGs around. So, what makes people keep coming back? Let's talk about Grand Chase. When Grand Chase first launched in the early 2000s, the MMO landscape looked very different. Most online RPGs relied on point and click movement or tab target combat. Grand Chase instead played like an arcade beat 'em up. You jumped, you dashed, you comboed enemies in real time. It almost felt like someone took a fighting game and turned it into an MMORPG. That alone made it stand out. Each character wasn't just another class with different skills, they were completely different playstyle. Elysus was your straightforward sword fighter, Lyre specialized in ranged attacks, Arm dominated with devastating magic. As the roster expanded with characters like Lass, Ryan, Ronan, Jin, Amy, Dio, Zero, and so many others, each newcomer introduced mechanics that genuinely changed how you approach the game. Instead of making alternate characters feel like reskins, Grand Chase made every new character feel like learning an entirely new game. That variety kept players invested for years. Then there was the job advancement system. Unlocking your second, third, and fourth jobs wasn't simply a matter of reaching a level requirement. You had to complete quests, gather difficult materials, clear dungeons, and sometimes spend countless hours farming. Looking back, some of those requirements were incredibly grindy, but finally equipping that shiny new weapon and unlocking a fresh moveset felt like an accomplishment. It wasn't handed to you, you earned it. The PvE content also deserves a lot of credit. Every continent introduced memorable bosses and increasingly difficult dungeons that encouraged teamwork rather than simply throwing bigger numbers at enemies. Players remember struggling through places like Gaikoza's castle, battling Kazeyaze, and eventually facing some of the game's most difficult late-game encounters. Even today, veterans can still remember specific boss mechanics from memory. That's the sign of memorable game design. Of course, it wasn't all dungeon crawling. PvP became one of Grand Chase's biggest attractions. Before esports became mainstream, players were already creating advanced combos, movement techniques, and mind games inside Grand Chase's arena. Learning how to dodge, juggle opponents, or cancel animations separated experienced players from newcomers. There was an actual skill ceiling. Winning wasn't simply about having better gear. It was about understanding your character and mastering their mechanics. That competitive scene helped build communities that stayed active for years. Speaking of community, that's probably the biggest reason Grand Chase has survived for so long. There was an era where online games naturally became social platforms. People formed guilds, made lifelong friends, stayed up late grinding event dungeons, argued over which character was overpowered, celebrated red drops together. For many players, Grand Chase wasn't just something that they played after school. It was their online hangout. Those memories don't disappear just because servers go offline. That's why the original shutdown in 2015 hit so many players emotionally. Entire communities suddenly lost the digital world they'd spent years building together. It wasn't simply losing a game, it felt like losing a place. Which brings us to Grand Chase Classic. When KOG announced the game's return in 2021, reactions were mixed. Many players were excited to revisit their childhood, while others questioned whether nostalgia alone could carry such an old game. The launch wasn't perfect. There were balance issues, monetization concerns, missing content, and updates that sparked heated discussions within the community. But despite all of that, people still logged in. Why? Because no other game has truly replicated what Grand Chase offered. Its combination of side scrolling action, unique character progression, MMO social systems, and anime inspired presentation remains surprisingly rare even today. You can find games with better graphics, games with bigger worlds, games with smoother animations, but finding another MMO that feels exactly like Grand Chase, that's much harder. And that's ultimately why Grand Chase Classic continues to attract players. Not because it's objectively the best MMORPG ever made, not because nostalgia magically fixes its flaws, but because it offers an experience that modern games rarely do. It reminds players of a time when online games were less about optimizing daily checklists and more about logging in simply because your friends were there. Sometimes preserving a classic isn't about creating the most modern experience. It's about keeping something alive that still feels special. And judging by how many people continue returning to Mesha after all these years, Grand Chase clearly remains one of those timeless online adventures. For more content like this and other updates down the line, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.